Welcome to Finding the Frame. Today, it is my privilege to welcome Tucker Anderson, a young, upcoming, versatile cinematographer whose work spans commercials from brands like Sonos and Yves Saint Laurent and Patagonia, fashion shoots, music videos, and action sports documentaries as well. He's just done his first feature. He's moving on to his second one now. And beyond his impressive portfolio, Tucker has also been the entrepreneurial founder of Element Filters, a series of premium ND filters made for filmmakers by filmmakers. So Tucker, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. I really want to talk about you and your projects and the things that you've been doing as a DP, first the young upcoming DP. So talk to me about shooting these smaller scale projects, first of all, and how you progressed into being doing these bigger feature DP features.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it all started, when you just have an interest in filmmaking, and I just picked up a camera. Essentially, for me, that happened when some of my friends started doing. I grew up in the mountains in Canada, and some of my friends started doing these gnarly ski tricks. And rather than risking breaking my own bones, I just picked up a camera and started filming. And so that was sort of the origin story, at least for me anyway. And that has segued into, many years of doing it now as a career and niching more into cinematography specifically. But yeah, I started as a solo videographer, one man band kind of operation. So humble beginnings for sure, as is the case with many DPs out there.
Yeah. So how did you go? What were you doing? Were you doing GoPro kind of filming? What were you filming with in the early days?
Yeah, initially it was GoPro. That was the Hero 2 was sort of where I started in that sort of era of action sports filmmaking specifically. And then I jumped up to the Micro Four Thirds world for a while with the Panasonic GH3, GH4 era of cameras, which is classic. And yeah, I basically would just shoot everything at like 96 frames per second, which now is funny in hindsight, but that was the world I was in. So yeah. Yeah.
So how did you step up from there to doing things like Sonos commercial? Obviously, I know that you've done a few of these. You've just talked about action sports. So those kind of videos become commercials, for things like Patagonia. But how did you move into things like Sonos and Yves Saint Laurent and shooting perfume bottles and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of a slow, you just kind of slowly chip away at your skills. For me, it was, starting in the action sports world, shooting a lot of ski movies in that world. And I became a really good camera operator that way. Because that's such a fast paced world, you inherently have to be a good camera operator to work in that space. So I sort of cut my teeth there, and as I got further into the film industry, lighting became more appealing to me, and therefore, working outside of the action sports world and more in commercials and fashion became more interesting. So I started to hone my skills in that world, and had some contacts that lived out in LA, and ended up moving to LA, which sort of launched me into the next sort of echelon of commercial filmmaking, and eventually into stuff like the Sonos project that you've talked about.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talked about how you said you became a better camera operator through shooting action sports and things that are going at fast pace. Dave Weldon, who's a DP that we know, who works a lot with Filmmakers Academy, he talks about filming basketball games, and having to be like the camera person for that and following the ball and trying to capture different things and stuff. And he talked about that's what helped him cut his teeth as a camera operator. So tell me now, you're moving into, you've just done your first feature film in the past, you're moving on to your second feature film. So talk to me about how you approach that differently then. How do you go from the smaller projects, like, well, not smaller at all, but, the commercial projects that are shorter, like Sonos commercials and stuff like that. How do you then change that and go into the feature film business? Because I think that's where a lot of our listeners will probably want to know, how do they make that step up? How do you go into feature films and stuff like that? Talk me through it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's as you said, I'm still growing very much. I'm not like the lol crawly that you've interviewed before who just won an Oscar kind of thing. So I'm definitely still cutting my teeth in every way and figuring it out as I go. I think for me, sort of the biggest piece of advice that I've given myself / listened to from other people is it's really a who business. And yes, you have to have the skills and the artistic vision, but there's been a surprising amount of opportunities in my career that have been sort of right place, right time. You meet the right person, and that has led to one thing or another. And that is the case with this second feature that I've landed as well. It was just I met one person who introduced me to another, and next thing you know, I'm on board shooting this second feature that I'm about to head into prep for in about a month here. So I think the difference between, to answer your initial question about the difference between commercials and a feature, I mean, it's an entirely different approach. Commercials are such a fast-paced game. You might be on set for 1 to 5 days on the higher end, depending on the spot, and often you get little to no prep time for that. They're just trying to churn it out really quickly, and so it's a completely different sort of fly by the seat of your pants approach. Whereas with this second feature that I'm now prepping for, like, even though there's an allotted amount of time of prep that I'm technically, paid for, if it's something that you're passionate about, which hopefully if you're in this business, you are, I'm just pouring all the time all the free time that I have into prep and having conversations with the director to make it as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Thank you for that. So talk me through now then how I know the details are kept under wraps about this feature film, but give us some kind of information or insight into the kind of project that it is and how you're approaching it and what your process is as approaching a movie like this.
Yeah, for sure. It's sort of I like to compare it to like the format of the Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight trilogy, in the sense that it takes place over a certain period of time in one day and sort of follows these characters traveling through the city, and that's about all I can say without getting into trouble. But it's a very like visceral, like verite in the terms of the way we're approaching it. A lot of handheld stuff of following the characters around, and so there's a lot of conversations that we had, and we've yet to do this about around like scouting and shooting at the right time of day, because it is so sort of run and gun approach in a lot of ways. And yet that's also balanced by these slower paced intimate scenes that take place indoors or whatever. And so sort of finding that duality has been an interesting conversation in pre-production so far.
Yeah. And how is this changing from before then? So like your first feature, how is this different? How are you now approaching your second feature? What have you learned from the first feature? I'm not asking you to say anything that might have even gone wrong, but something that you might have particularly found challenging in the first feature that you now, sort of changing your approach for the second feature. Do you understand what I'm asking there?
Yeah. For sure, yeah. I mean, admittedly, when I shot my first feature, once again, that was a right place, right time situation, and I was kind of thrown into the fire. Sort of as I was just learning how to light. So I was super green, but it was one of those situations where I just learned on the job and decided to throw myself into the fire, which is definitely a terrifying approach and can pay off or backfire pretty quickly. Fortunately, it worked out for me. We saw the project through and it panned out all right. I guess the big differences I see in terms of like the first feature is the second is sort of the scope is largely different. There's a bigger budget on the second one, so we have more days to shoot, more access to crew, etc. So that helps a lot. And also just the creative, like the first one I shot was like a Lifetime movie. So if you're familiar with that, there's sort of a certain formula that they like to churn those out in, and you shoot, like we shot a whole movie, 92 pages in 12 days. So super, super fast pace. And for this one, we have a little bit more, we have 20 days to shoot. And the approach is just different as well in terms of like how much prep time, et cetera, just because of the sort of creative investment, especially from the director. This is his first feature. And then he's super passionate and excited about it. There's things from his personal life that are like being drawn on and poured into the movie. And so I think there's a lot more heart in it. And I think that really drives, will end up in the end quality of the film.
Yeah. But that leads me to two questions really, follow up on that. So first of all, like you talked about the process and everything like that, and your prep, and I'm wondering what your process is for prep. Do you go to the script first, or do you go to different things? Do you talk to the director themselves and try and get a feel for what he's trying to show through the film? What is your process? How do you prep for a film like that?
For sure. I mean, I honestly, admittedly, and this is relevant to the Filmmakers Academy audience as well, is I stole a theory from Shane where he talks about reading the script through multiple times. I think he said he reads it 4 different times in his case. and sort of reading it through different lenses each time you read it. Obviously, the first time you read it, you're just taking it in at face value and interpreting the story and sort of deciding whether it would be something you'd want to be a part of, as a DP, and whether you see it as a movie. And then the second, third, fourth, etc. read are more like, okay, how do I see this movie as a DP? And what in between those readings, I personally like to have conversations with the director to try to draw out how they're seeing it as well, and see how much we're on the same page for it. See, what sort of ideas can be bounced back and forth. But ultimately, your job as the DP is to serve the director's vision. And so if they see, a scene in a particular way, it's your job to sort of translate, okay, well, how do we execute that technically, especially if they have a very specific vision for it, or if there's other moments in the film, that are more open-ended, and there's perhaps more of a conversation, a bounce back and forth, where I can present different ideas that we could use to approach different scenes and stuff. So yeah, I found it to be kind of scene by scene basis in this case, but ultimately it's very different with each director DP collaboration. At least that's how it's been in my experience.
Yeah, and you talked about it being verite and you wanted that kind of handheld feel and stuff like that. Is that something that you kind of go like, so we talked to Lol Crawley about this actually, and he was telling this great story about how the scene in The Brutalist, there's a scene where Esbet confronts Van Buren right near probably towards the end of the film. And he talked about going from Steadicam when she's walking into the room to confront him, to the moment where she's confronting him, it's very handheld. And he talked about how that was motivated by the feelings of the character, the emotions of the character, and the emotion of the scene. Is that something that you're thinking about when you're reading through the script? Is that something you're going for, or what are you looking for when you look at a script and thinking about as a DP?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good example of something I would look for. It's really about like what is the point of the scene? Like, what is this? What are the characters going through? What is the scene trying to say? Which in, a lot of cases, if the director, especially if the director has written the script themselves, in this case, for the feature I'm about to do, that is the case. And I think that really helps, because then they're inside the character's head. They know what's going on already. And so they know the motivation for that. And so once they can explain that to you, like, let's say it's, this character's feeling lost, or they're, backed into a corner, and it's then my job to translate that into, okay, how do we want to showcase that visually, whether it's shooting a frame within a frame if they feel trapped or whatever, or it's handheld because the scene's supposed to be more chaotic because the character is feeling chaotic at that time, or whatever it may be. I mean, those are just sort of base level examples, but I think like it's hours and hours of conversation, of essentially just asking the director a million questions about how they interpret the script, and trying to pull what's inside of their brain and put it into mine. And then I take that and translate that into camera, lensing, lighting, movement, et cetera, as DP does. So yeah, it's a challenging, but it's also like the pre-production is the fun part as well, because you can just, your imagination goes, and there's no producer, breathing down your neck saying you don't have money for a techno crane or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really
do you
enjoy
allow
that
yourself to dream at that point? Sorry for interrupting. Do you allow yourself to dream at that point? In the early parts of the film, before you get any producer on your neck, you can go, well, maybe we could have a techno crane here, or maybe we could have this or that or the other.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's ultimately like what tool is going to serve the story best, but I try to think about it before we have the conversations around like how much budget there is for equipment or whatever. I try to approach it with an unbiased thought process, if that makes sense. So like what's going to serve the story best here, what's going to, and also just building the visual, the visual style of the film as well. Like what is the overarching style of this film? What's the look? And then how do the different scenes, different elements, different feelings fit into that? And I think that then obviously translates into like, okay, this is going to be a big lighting setup. We're going to need more genie crew this day, or we want to do this certain move, so we're going to need this certain tool, or whatever it may be. And then you obviously have those conversations and make certain compromises, as you do, I think, on a $1.5 million film all the way up to a $200 million film, from what I've heard from. So I try to go in optimistically, and then you use your creative thinking hat just as you do about thinking about the movie to solve those problems that are more logistical problems as well.
And you're operating, aren't you? Or you're a DP who's operating. You're with the camera all that. Do you think you'll stay that way throughout your career, or is that something that might change?
Being on the camera is the best job on set, in my opinion. I think it's almost like it's a more intimate process when you're on the camera in a lot of ways. I find, especially when you're, right there with the actors, like you're sort of a third actor in a way, like you're part of the scene, and that sort of dance that happens is the most magical thing when like everything comes together. That feeling is like pretty special. And obviously there's moments where if you're shooting multicam or you're on some sort of specialty camera rig, you're going to be away from the camera. But anytime that I can be on the camera myself, I think I will probably carry that through till hopefully I'm 75 and still shooting movies. So
do you think that you just talked then about when you're in with the actors and you're kind of third actor and stuff like that? This was something I was going to move on to a little later, but this probably brings it in now, actually. Talking about your approach to working with actors. Obviously, you've worked with some quite high-level actors and celebrities, I suppose we'd call them. What's your approach as a DP with them? Well, I'm trying to think of it. Yeah, what would your advice be for upcoming DPs who are going to potentially be encountering celebrity and stuff like that for ads, for commercials, or even for films? What would your advice be for them?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've worked with celebrities mostly on the commercial side of things, in that capacity. To me, like at the end of the day, we're all just there to do a job. It's kind of how I see that, and they're professional. And if you remain professional as well, like that's the right way to go. I think the biggest piece, especially sort of in the fashion beauty world, is to make people feel as comfortable and supported as you can. And since you are, like, speaking about that dance, you are like essentially the first person that's right behind the camera that they're gonna witness or relate to, or after the director calls cut, you're right there. And the directors and producers might be over at Video Village, and I think that's the sort of, your reaction can actually impact how they react to a certain scene, or how a take went or whatever. And so you actually carry a lot of weight as the camera operator at DP. And I think that just sort of being a calming presence and being very professional and straightforward, and speaking to them when you need to, but not, obviously, I would assume most people know in the film industry, but it's like film 101 to not go, be a fangirl towards the talent, especially if they're a celebrity. And I think that's been, I've seen that beneficial to me in terms of like me being a repeat customer for certain brands that have celebrity talent, or whatever, and just navigating those relationships. But ultimately they're just people. Like, they might have a large Instagram following, but as much as I love film, they might love acting or whatever it is that their profession is. And so I think just treating them with the same respect and dignity as you do, hopefully, your entire crew, will go a long way, and has in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm seeing a change right now, even with the Academy Awards this weekend just been, and talking to people like yourself, like Lol, like different DPs and stuff like that. They like to really see it in a much more team atmosphere kind of thing. I was watching a great interview with Hoyt van Hoytema. No, it wasn't. It was with Brad Pitt, and he was talking about his relationship with Hoyt van Hoytema on Ad Astra. And obviously, because Hoyt's right there with him in that moment, he's actually giving him a good, like you just said there, a good reaction can really sort of elevate their performance on future takes. You know what I mean? So it's like you want to be capturing the great shot, and they want to be giving the best performance they can give.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very true all the way through. Yeah.
So you're, in terms of your career right now, obviously you're in this state of growth. We're all in a state of growth, I suppose, and you're at this sort of quite high level in terms of moving on to something that can be Academy Award level, like you said with Lal or with Shane, or that kind of level up there. So while you're on this sort of growth, and what are your aspirations? Let's talk about your mindset and how. What you're trying to become, how you're trying to get there, as an artist, what projects are you selecting, those kind of things. Give us a little bit of background on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like, I've done a lot, and I've also done absolutely nothing at all. So I like to describe it. And I think as with many folks who, work in commercials or at a similar place to myself, there's sort of this happy medium between taking the opportunities that come your way and being selective. And I think that, saying when you're first starting out, just saying yes to everything is the way to go, just so you can build some kind of portfolio. And I'm sort of now arriving at a space where in the commercial world it's more about like leveling up of like a tier of commercial, whether that's scope, scale, budget, etc. And essentially sort of using that as an opportunity to hone my skills or try new techniques to then apply to hopefully more movies. Going into my second feature, obviously like doing two features is an excellent place to be. And also, in order to get to that upper echelon of the lull trolleys, and because that is the ultimate goal for myself for sure, there's a lot of work to be done. Like I'm young, I'm in my late 20s, so I've got a lot of time ahead of me and I try to be, as much as I'm excited about the future and get anxious about it sometimes and want it to go faster, I'm also trying to be as patient as I can be with myself and just know that like it takes time, and you need a lot of life experience and just time on set. And so I'm trying to just put that time in and take the opportunities that I can to hone my skills and build my portfolio and learn from working with new directors and learn from other DPs and essentially apply that to hopefully end up on the Oscar stage myself one day.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's very similar to it's the same as every profession, isn't it? You're constantly trying to, in this industry, you're constantly trying to be seen, by somebody. As soon as somebody sees your work and goes, "That's really good work," then you've pretty much made it, and you'll start getting jobs through the door. As I suppose Lol's going to now get an awful lot because he's going to be recognized on the global stage. So yeah, I suppose it's everything like that. You're constantly building up this portfolio, and I suppose it's your eye. You're trying to show your evolving art as well.
Totally. Well, and it's a taste thing as well, which I think comes with time and experience and can change over time as well. It's like what it's almost sort of translating the feeling that you get when whether you like something or not. Like there'll be moments on set where I just know that something feels right or something doesn't, and I almost feel like in the attempt to climb the ladder and get to a level of somebody who's working at that level, like Lowell Crawley or any of the other ASC DPs or what have you, is sort of that understanding and sort of being able to break down what that essence is. And I think you kind of develop that over time. And so that's part of, ties back to what I was saying about being patient, is like, you can't just like immediately understand your style or your taste straight out the gate, because you are constantly changing, evolving and developing what that is for yourself. And I think that's a, part of the practice, which is equally enjoyable and painful at the same time.
I suppose it's this thing with art. Brendan, we talked yesterday on the phone, Tucker, and Brendan was on the call as well, and he said something which I found really interesting, which was everybody wants to be an artist until the bills show up. You know what I mean? And it's that thing, and this is something, a bridge that, even though they're kind of two separate things that you're doing, it allows me to bridge them and go into this bit of the interview now to talk a little bit about, you were also the entrepreneur who's created Element Filters, and this is your product that you're pretty much, what is it? It's these filters that are the standard size that can go with any matte box, but you designed this. Tell me how that came along. Tell me how this all started. It was during COVID, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, the pandemic happened, and along with everybody else who is a freelancer in the film industry, like lost all my jobs, which was an interesting time, just because nobody knew it was happening in general in the world, but also because nobody really knew what to do with themselves. And as much as I had a couple of weeks where I enjoyed sitting on the couch and doing nothing, and then got sort of antsy, as I think a lot of artists do, and was like, oh, what do I do? I want to do something. And at that time, getting together with a crew and making a film wasn't really the appropriate thing to do. And so I sort of dove down this rabbit hole of, essentially at that time I was going to purchase a new set of 4x5 ND filters for myself. And then because the pandemic happened, investing in new equipment didn't make much sense anymore. And I was looking at what was out there and the cost to quality ratio, and essentially dove down the rabbit hole enough to figure out a way to do that better. So the goal of the company was to make these these filters that were more accessible cost wise, but maintained the same quality as some of the legacy brands that have been doing it forever. And I was at a place in my career where, you know, it made sense to own more of my equipment. And yeah, so that was sort of the spark of the idea. And I spent the better part of 2020, 2021, 2022 developing these filters until we had something that I felt good enough to sort of throw a stamp of approval on, and created a whole company out of it, rather than just and ended up investing way more than just buying an initial set of filters. But yeah, and it's great. And now it's like essentially a side hustle for me. That's, you know, especially in LA, we were talking about this yesterday on the phone, but it's been a rocky few years in the film industry. And so to have that sort of side project that I can pour time into when it is slow between shoots or what have you, has been an awesome outlet, and, you know, a sense of creativity in its own right as well.
Yeah. I suppose, I mean, is the plans to put different types of filters out there? That, you know, like you've got, I don't mean to say like your competition name, but like say Tiffin or something like that, you know, they've got absolutely multitudes of different types of filters right now. You're sort of building up your sort of library. Tell me about the process. Is it something where you go, you know, I really want to make kind of glimmer glass now, I want to have something done? Is that something that you kind of go through your plan for stuff that you're going to use, or is it something that you're thinking that might be coming out in the near future? Talk me through that.
Yeah, for sure. It's yeah, it's kind of like an experimental thing, just in the same way that you know would experiment with different lighting or camera moves. But so right now we have ND filters, we have clear filters that just protect your other filters and lenses, and then we have what's called an opaline diffusion filter. That was sort of the genesis for that, was just wanting to create a new look with a diffusion filter, like something that didn't already exist. Obviously, there's so many, you know, variations of Pro Mist or Glimmer Glass or Pearlescent or what have you, as the legacy brands have already made, and sort of in testing all of those, just for essentially for the goal of standing out as a DP and making, you know, a look that is sort of different than what everything else that's out there. That being sort of the motivation for it. We created this like new formula essentially, and now have partnered with a company called Condor Blue to create a version that has a metal frame around it that's more protected and lighter weight. And so it all selfishly stems back to like, what would I want as a DP, and then that translates into the products. And admittedly, like as you said, Tiffin has, you know, 100 different variations, and we are slowly chipping away at new products and new things. But because it is, you know, it's a really small company, it's a side hustle essentially, so it takes time for that to happen. And ultimately, like, the DP career for me is the priority. And so, you know, finding that balance can be tricky at times.
And you're doing it all on your own, are you? Have you got a couple of people working with you? Is it like a small number of you?
Yeah, so I'm the owner of the company, and then I've essentially like outsourced different bits and pieces of it to subcontractors and what have you, to sort of make the machine of it all run. So if I need to go, you know, leave for a couple months and shoot this feature film, you know, it's a well enough oiled machine that it'll keep running in the background.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah, a good place to have it, because otherwise, it would not be sustainable without that. Obviously,
It's things,
you know.
it's things like this that really make me feel good for this industry. Having people that are willing to sort of innovate and try and find new ways to, you know, put the thing up on the screen and make it look good, you know. And I think that that's really important. You mentioned Condor Blue there and Lucas, and, you know, it's really nice that these companies that are sort of man-made companies, I suppose, are man-made and woman-made, but you know what I mean? These very kind of personal, intimate companies that are trying the best to innovate and create new things to make filmmaking happen. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
And I suppose that brings me on to, like, where do you see this medium going in terms of things? You know, you've talked about LA. It's quite difficult out here right now. You know, we've all got family members or friends who are involved in this business, and it is dry out here. And people look to Hollywood as a kind of mecca of filmmaking, you know, a place where it's always happening. And unfortunately, you know, it's not at the moment. Where do you see it going? Do you think that there's going to come stuff's going to come back to LA? You know, or is it something that you think might be moving around the world now, and the tide might be shifting?
There's such a duality to it. You know, I think LA, the thing that will keep the film industry at least semi-rooted in LA is just the history. I think that you can't really replicate the history of Hollywood and LA as like the mecca of filmmaking around the world. Essentially, I think that there's enough roots that there will be ties to LA for sure in the future. I think there's a lot of, you're playing devil's advocate on the other side of that. There's a lot of opportunity where people are seeing whether it's tax cuts other places for productions, or just, being on location and wanting a different look than, palm trees at sunset kind of thing. And obviously people have created, made LA look like a lot of different places in the world. But yeah, I see it continuing to grow. I think what's inspiring the most for me is just seeing opportunities at the indie film level. Like you take, Anora that just won Best Picture this past weekend, such an indie film, low budget, sub $10 million film that has essentially, risen to the top of the film industry in a whatever capacity you, depending on how much weight you give awards season, but has done very well for itself, the point being. And so I think there's sort of this hopeful underbelly of everything that's going on with all the strikes, and with it being a rocky few years in LA of indie film. And maybe that's just like the level that I'm at, that, I have rose colored glasses to look at it through, but I'm hopeful that the medium, is not going anywhere anytime soon, despite all of the scary looming conversations that there are out there. I think people want to see real human made art.
I kind of wanted to dive a little bit more into sort of your adverts and the commercials that you've done, talking, because the Sonos one's really cool. How it goes around the bloke who's watching TV and stuff. But I really like the YSL one and the way that you turn the camera and stuff like that. The way that you tilted it when you're inside. Was it like a mine shaft or something like that?
Yeah.
It's just really cool watching. Yeah, go on, sorry.
We shot that up in north of Vancouver in Squamish. There's a big mine there that let us get access to that location, and honestly, that was the thing that really elevated that piece more than anything else. Was just like the built-in production design of this literal mine. And there's some funny behind the scenes photos of us all wearing hard hats on set with that one, and the Steadicam operating around with a hard hat on. It just looks kind of silly, but I mean, it created some beautiful visuals, as you saw in the YSL piece.
Yeah, it was a great thing. And so when you're shooting, here's the crazy thing. So Shane once did a bunch of lessons and different videos and stuff like this on shooting products. I think it was a beer bottle that he shot, and he was showing the way that so how did you light how were you lighting the bottle? How were you shooting it and everything like that? Talk me through that bit, because I'm really intrigued as to product shooting.
For sure. Yeah, there's two different things we did on that particular shoot. One of the product shots was actually on location in the mine. We wanted to get the product in the actual environment to sort of tie it together with the rest of the piece. It was sort of different. We had different setups for each thing. In that particular case, there's this big building in the mine that had these giant windows opened up. So it was sort of this big natural softbox that was keyed. And then we had like a nice backlight on it because that bottle is clear. And we wanted to show the sort of orangey gold glow to it that particular bottle has. And then separate to that, we had an entire day of just shooting product stuff. And you see in the spot, there's different sort of powders, and we had this different fabric flowing around. And so we had essentially had a whole play day, which was an absolute blast, to just mess around and get all these sexy product shots that ended up in the final piece. And there's a lot in there too that ended up on the cutting room floor that you don't see in the final 30-second spot. But yeah, it was a fun one.
Do you, what I'm interested in is as well, like things like the Sonos advert and stuff like that. When you're getting it, are you just getting the pitch deck? When you're brought on board, what are they giving you for you to sort of prepare for that advert? Or are you getting it, sort of not? Go on, talk me through it.
Yeah, I mean, the Sonos one in particular was pretty last minute. I think I got contacted maybe 3 or 4 days before the shoot happened. So it was just like you get contacted, you get approved for the job, you get sent the deck, and then you're off to the races. That one in particular, I got that job because I had some other pieces of my portfolio that were sort of this black void look that they were wanting to go for, as you can see in the final piece if you check that out. In addition to the fact that the concept was to do it all in one take. So it was a 15-second ad, one shot, that they wanted to shoot on a robot arm, a bolt arm. And I had worked with a robot arm, a motion capture arm motion control arm a few times before that. So I think the combination of like having a similar look in my portfolio and then having the experience of like working with the motion control arm really helped me get that job. But it was super fun to sort of create this one singular take look. And we had a big blue screen that for a lot of the VFX that you see at the end of the spot. Yeah, we spent essentially like a whole day working on one shot that turned into the final ad for that one, which was a fun creative challenge in and of itself.
How often are you going out shooting for yourself? How often are you going out, with a camera and shooting your own stuff so that you can, just capture something for your own eye? How often are you doing that as a DP?
Yeah, I mean, I like to do that in the capacity of like a passion project, essentially. As far as me just going out myself, like generally more on the still side is where I would do that, and just practicing composition and seeing how light is reacting with the world in a natural way. But I think as a cinematographer, like it's sort of you're stuck between a rock and a hard place where like in order to hone your skills, you also want a director who like has this vision to help translate that, because that is ultimately your job. And as much as yes, you can learn a lot by just going out yourself and shooting, having the team aspect of it is really helpful. So the most recent example of that for me was shooting this sort of short film music video crossover. That was just a passion project that there was no crew on. It was the director, myself, and I think we had a PA like holding a bounce midway through. And we scouted and shot the right time of day. And the end piece it's on my portfolio. Like it's a beautiful piece. And I think that speaks to sort of the testament of like, just going and shooting stuff and creating stuff that's really like for you as filmmakers. And also, if you are able to put in the time in pre-production and plan it out really well, you can create some beautiful visuals just with the outside world that we have here.
Here's a question for you, and this is just a random one. So when you're going out and shooting stuff for yourself or anything like that, are you trying to find out what your eye is, what you are, or are you trying out different artistic styles and different ways of shooting to try and practice for new projects or anything like that? What are you going out to shoot for yourself as an artist? You know what I mean? And also, as a follow-up as well on that, you've got Entrepreneur, you're doing this with all your filters, you're also doing your DPing when you're working for all different things, you're working on this new thing. How much time do you give to yourself as an artist, as a person, to do something for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky balance once again, especially throwing in the filters on top of the balance of, running a business that is just cinematography, which is yourself, so I'm essentially juggling those three things. And yeah, I think it really depends on the project, like if in an ideal world, like the projects that are jobs are also, your own personal passion projects. And I think as I get into bigger things like this feature, like that very much feels the case. And that's a very privileged position to be in, that I've been working a long time to sort of get any opportunities that feel like that. But I think it is an important thing, because you can do all, some more corporate commercially feeling things that are great for the paycheck. And I've said this on another podcast before, but like the phrase that they like to say is one for the real and one for the meal. And, sometimes you do things for the paycheck and that pays the bills and puts food on the table. And other times you do things for yourself that feel super fulfilling and end up in your demo reel. It's kind of case by case basis, to be honest. I don't have a like exact percentage of this is how much time I allot to this versus that. It's kind of ebbs and flows along with the roller coaster of freelance. And often when it rains, it pours, and you just take the jobs, and then you're burnt out for a month, and then you have, the resources and time to do a passion project. And that's when that happens. Like it's such a sort of the blessing and the curse of the film industry is it's not like becoming a lawyer where you go, past the bar and you have that ladder to climb that's really clear. It's just kind of like the Wild West out here, which is a lot of fun and terrifying at the same time.
You kind of learn that you want to be a filmmaker, don't you? Because you read all these different books and you're super into it. Like I was down at the Academy Museum, as I said today, and just walking around and learning about color and how they, like there's this really cool story that I was watching this thing where, in the old days when they were shooting black and white, they used to have a red filter and they were wearing red makeup. So the red filter stopped them from being able to see all the makeup. Then they pulled it away, and that's how they made them look like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or like, the Wicked Witch becoming, or whatever it is, the old woman becoming the Wicked Witch or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. They pull away this red filter, and you're like, it's just mesmerizing to me. Yeah. Just learning about how films are made and how people do stuff and did stuff in the past.
And there's so much history. Like you could spend a lifetime learning the history of cinema. It's a rabbit hole in the best possible way. That's so fun to go down. And there's so
It was
much.
the one. Oh, sorry, going on.
I was just gonna say there's so much to learn and so much to like innovate for going forward in the future as well. Like there's no right or wrong way to do anything, and you just have all this data and experience that people have done in the past, and then all these crazy new things people are trying now and in the future. And I think that's like it just feels like a big creative sandbox that's a blast to play in.
Yeah. I mean, who was your guy that you looked up to, or guy or girl or whatever? Who was it, the cinematographer that you looked up to, or their work that you looked up to when you were younger? Or was it a director? Was it not even, it might have just been a painter. Who was it that kind of inspired you to go, this is what I need to kind of pursue?
Admittedly, I don't even feel like there was a one individual that was that sort of pinnacle for me. I think what captures me more than anything else is movies that feel based in reality, but then have a sense of like elevated cinematic language behind them that help translate what's happening in the story into the viewer's head without them even knowing it. And there's sort of that, like, you're riding that line of subtlety where it's like the shot might be saying something without saying anything at all. That's the point of the shot, is getting in your head, but you don't even know that it's getting in your head. And that sort of dance and duality is what inspires me the most. And I see that in a lot of different movies, a lot of different DPs, a lot of different directors execute that in various different ways. But I think that's like a more standout answer than like one particular name per se, because there's so many talented people out there. It's like the list would be endless.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's tough. It's like when people say to you, who's your favorite, or what's your favorite film? You know what I mean? And it's always, for me, it's like, I can't even name one particular film that I enjoyed the most. You know what I mean? You can't do that.
Totally. I have my Letterboxd top 4. The last slot switches quite a bit. So
I bet, yeah. And also, you always feel pretentious as well when you're talking to people. You don't want to go, oh, Mrs. Doubtfire, and they're like, what? You know, it's not a Kubrick film until this. I always say Cool Runnings, but it's for a different reason. It's not necessarily I'm watching it for the great cinematography. I just enjoy the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that speaks to like the language of cinema as well. It's like sometimes the most impactful films are not like the most pretty the way in terms of the way they're shot or whatever. It's more like the story. And that's why I say like cinematography that, you know, helps elevate the story and helps put the viewer into the mind of the characters. That's why that has the most impact to me, because I think that's the most impactful version of like a cinematic language, essentially. As pretentious as that also sounds.
No, that sounds great. I was wondering, so we can't really be pretentious now in our industry because we're getting so much influence from other sides. And my reason for saying that is I look at, what's the name, Eva Victor. She did a movie called Sorry Baby, I think it's called. It went to Sundance. Was it Sundance? Yeah, Sundance this year, and did really well. Right, the story behind her is fascinating. And I read this in... I can't remember, it might have been Variety, whoever it was. She was a TikToker who used to film herself and, you know, like, pretty much did really well. She got lots of following on TikTok. And Barry Jenkins, whose company Pastel is a production company, they found her on TikTok and said, this girl's got real good comedic timing. She knows how to edit herself and stuff like that. And they gave her, I think they gave her 2 days of studio time with a crew, with the potential DP that she would work with, and then gave her editing time, I think for like a week or something, to edit together a proof of concept for a potential film. And she did it. They then funded her film, and then it's gone off and it's done well at Sundance. It's now been bought for $8 million by A24. And it's going to be obviously put in cinemas and stuff like that. Now, we're seeing this happening regularly. You know what I mean? Like these people who are being plucked. A great example I give is Shane's one, Rudy Mancuso, Musica, which he did. And it's now on Amazon Prime, and it did really well at South by Southwest. That one, Rudy Mancuso, was a Vine artist, you know, 6-second Vines. And somebody found him and went, this is the guy. And to make that film, he pretty much put together a load of short, you know, sets of his life to make this one film, which did really well, as I said. You know, that's something that excites me about this industry, because we've got people coming from all different elements. You know, do you see that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's in a large way, the most inspiring part about it, and what I was talking about earlier regarding like being hopeful for indie film, is you see opportunities just like the one you described. Or there's, another example is this guy, I believe by the name of Wesley Wang, who made a short film that blew up on YouTube via a TikTok following. And now David Fincher sent him an email and was like, hey, we want to make your next movie. And now he's signed to direct his first feature with Sony Entertainment. And it's just like, boom. Or another great example is David F. Sandberg, who did the Lights Out short film that got really popular. And then he, got his first feature, the feature version, funded, and now he's doing Shazam and Annabelle Creation, all these other crazy films. And it inspires, as much as like you shouldn't just hope for your lucky break to happen. It is inspiring to hear those stories, to feel like it is possible, it is achievable. And you also have, the version of that where it's like it appears like an overnight success, but the reality is they've been putting in the work and doing that training and honing their filmmaking skills for a decade before that moment happens. And so people say overnight success, but the reality is, yes, you have to have the talent, but like, I don't know. I think just seeing examples of that is inspiring in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about it before. It was like, who you know, I think you said in answer to one of my questions. And it's absolutely right. It's getting yourself known. I think constantly practicing that art, constantly putting yourself around there. I know that Brendan and Kira from Filmmakers Academy, they do a lot of stuff on social media and saying how you can market yourself and show your worth, show what you're doing. You know what I mean? I think that's a really important thing. And it's something that you've done. I mean, I really like just going through your website, and I'm sure we can put a clip up here if it's still recording or whatever, but like, it's really cool just to be able to scroll over people's work and see the variety of things that they've done like that. It really is a way of marketing yourself. I suppose that's something that is a good piece of advice for a lot of people who are going to be Filmmakers Academy listeners and viewers, making sure that you market yourself online, getting yourself, because it's the only way that people are learning about people right now. You know what I mean? I mean, like going through your Vimeo, you've got some great stuff on Vimeo right now. You know what I mean? It's just looking through people's stuff like that is how people are going to get discovered,
For sure. Yeah. And take inspiration from other, like I go visit, DP's websites who I really like to, inspire how I curate mine or whatever. It's just like a give and take. And yeah, such a business as well.
Do you ever reach out to him, Tucker? Do you ever reach out to him and ask him? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I sort of level up in the commercial world, if I approach, I did a job this past fall, and it was, the first like food commercial I had done. And I was like, maybe there's something I don't know about lighting food. Like it seems relatively straightforward, but just in case, I reached out to this other DP who I know has done 10 different food spots and was just like, hey man, I'm doing this food spot. I want to know if there's anything specific I should know that, might be helpful. And he gave me a couple pointers about that. And that was, a 20-minute phone call that I had with him that, probably helps make the piece look a lot better than it would have if I had just, not that I couldn't have achieved that on my own, but I think that like, that speaks to like, if you are in this business, you probably love it so much that like you live and breathe it. Otherwise you're not going to last the, long days that you have and the, the roller coaster of it all. And so I think that like, I'm just such an advocate for reaching out to any and everybody, because if they know who you are, and at a worst case scenario, like you reach out and they don't reply, or you get a coffee and they never hire you for your job, but they might meet somebody else who's hiring you for a job, and they might say, hey, have you ever met this Tucker guy? And they said, oh yeah, we had coffee 5 years ago. And if that is what lands you that opportunity, like that's super worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. Yeah. I mean, there's a guy that I know who was at AFI. I think his name's Lucas Djindjic, and he reached out to Janusz Kaminski, who's obviously Spielberg's DP, and basically became his assistant or whatever, just a hold your coat guy, I suppose, or doing stuff like that. And he ended up working on West Side Story with him, so he could see how Janusz, was lighting and all these kind of things. And now he's obviously his own DP. He's gone off to, he's doing all kinds of amazing things. But it's like learning and just constantly picking up. I think that's, if we go back to a previous point that we both made when we were talking about LA and we were talking about what the future is for it, the good thing that we've got going for us in LA is there's an awful lot of people who've come here out of a devout love of film and a devout love of making cinema and doing stuff, like even at the Oscars, there were people, I think Mikey Madsen said she's a proud LA girl who came from LA. She came here to be amongst people who wanted to make good cinema and make good films and good things. You know what I mean? So I suppose a real good point on this is just kind of saying, what makes me pleased about being out here is the community that you've got of people that you can reach out. You know, the ASC is a fantastic community. Unfortunately, it's a bit gate-kept and not everybody can get in there, but it's really nice when people can all come together of that same kind of vocation, that same kind of idea, and make stuff together, you know?
Yeah. It's an infectious energy. Like, I remember when I first moved here I was from a small town in Canada with like 10,000 people in it. And so there was a strong community for how many people there were there, but coming to LA is a whole nother level of like meeting these people who are, you know, doing the most insane things in the film industry. And that inspires you to essentially do better for yourself. And I think that like, it's kind of like you're that quote, you're the culmination of the 5 closest people around you kind of thing. And it's so easy to surround yourself with cool, talented people when you are in a mecca like LA. And that's, it's inspiring to be around for sure.
So Tucker, you're going to do a new product release for Element Filters. Do you want to give us a little bit of information about that? And we'll hopefully make it available to our Filmmakers Academy listeners or viewers or anything like that with a code at the end of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, by the time this is pre-recorded, but by the time you guys are watching, we'll have launched a brand new version of our ND filters. It's essentially like everything that we've taken the feedback from all of the different users we've had, and from our own use, and sort of reiterated the whole thing. So the ND filters now have a frame around them. They're full spectrum rather than hot mirror. The color accuracy is even better. They're lighter weight, more protected, and all for a very similar cost as before. That's way more accessible than a lot of the other stuff out there. And so we're super excited about it. As you said before, like, you know, as a filmmaker, as a cinematographer myself, I'm using these products every day on set. And it's been about 5 years since the initial research was done for the initial product. And so I feel like we've done a good overhaul of the whole system to create this new product. And we're super excited to share that with the Filmmakers Academy community, who we can give a custom discount to, which I believe we can post about in the community page. Is that how that's going to work, Chris?
Yeah, we'll definitely get that information to our listeners. And take advantage of this, because it sounds fascinating, Tucker, and I'm really interested to see where you go with it, what more things you're going to have. I hope that we can stay in touch with each other, and we can keep a following on your website and on all your IMDb and everything like that. And hopefully we'll do a follow-up on this, because I really look forward to seeing how this feature's gone, what you've learned from it, what challenges there were that you were doing, if you could share them with us, and then hopefully we can lead that up to the product launch, to the actual launch of the film itself, if it's going to be in cinemas, fingers crossed, or if it's out on streaming or anything like that. It'd be wonderful, you know. So let's stay in touch like this. But Tucker, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you about your career. Thank you for joining me on Finding the Frame.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you having me. Yeah, looking forward to part 2 and all the learnings that will be had. Appreciate
Thanks a lot, Tucker.